Thank you, Professor Goodchild, and thank you, Alistair, for giving us a plug before we even came on stage. I think on behalf of Fred and myself and our organisations, I think the contribution of you, Alistair, and others in setting up our organisations, we should be thanking you for our jobs, because in 1998, when EFNA was being founded, I was 12, I think. So I'm not going to talk about the past. I'm glad you did. The focus of our presentation is going to be on the here and now and what we're doing at this moment and what we plan to be doing in the coming years. So as Professor Goodchild has said, my name is Donna Walsh, and some of you heard me speaking yesterday in the Parliament. I work as Executive Director at the European Federation of Neurological Associations. I am Irish, despite the fact my name badge says I'm from the United Kingdom. We are staying in Europe, and I'm glad we're staying in Europe because you'll see a lot of what we do is advocacy at the European institutions. And I'm joined by my counterpart, Frédéric Destrebecq from the European Brain Council. So we're going to start by telling you very briefly a little bit about our organisations and then move on to present some of the current projects and initiatives in which we are engaged and which hopefully we can work with you on as we move forward. So who are we? Well, we're an umbrella of pan-European disease-specific neurology patient groups. Of course, we include Dystonia Europe as one of our most active members, so your Executive Director, Monica Benson, is on our board and very much involved in a lot of what we do. But we also include groups like the European Multiple Sclerosis Platform, the Stroke Alliance for Europe, the European Parkinson's Disease Association, the European Headache Alliance. So you can see we range from very rare disorders to very common, well-known disorders. So we're an umbrella of an umbrella, and also we're part of larger umbrellas, including groups like the European Brain Council, which is Fred's organisation.
Thank you, Donna. And good afternoon to all. I would like to join Donna's praise to Alistair for our reason of existing. So basically, EBC, we are the umbrella above. We have as members EFNA, obviously, but other organizations. And whilst we share that ambition of standing together for the brain, we do it by incorporating the views of patients, scientific societies like the European Academy of Neurology, which was mentioned earlier, neurological, neurosurgical societies, neuropsychopharmacologists, as well as basic neuroscientists. We also have a network of national brain councils and a network of industry partners. So the fundamental basis for the collaboration and partnership with organizations like EFNA and its members is basically based on our vision that we promote the improvement of quality of life of those living with a brain and neurological condition.
And I think, as you can see here, as well as having a common vision, we also have a very common mission. So you can see the EBC mission is on the right-hand side of the screen, or your left. Our mission is on this side of the screen, and I'm not going to read through it. It's quite a wordy slide, and I don't expect you to read it. But what I wanted to showcase was the fact that they mention the same sort of things. So fostering cooperation and communicating with members, promoting dialogue and building partnerships with relevant stakeholder groups, raising awareness, influencing policy and working at the European institutions. So it's broadly similar, and that's great in one way because it means we have a remit and a real opportunity to actually work together to achieve positive change. On the other hand, it can make things a little bit tricky because I think the perception is often that we are one and the same. And I think especially to external stakeholders, we often get asked, well, what's the difference between EFNA and EBC? And I think what we want to do as we run through this presentation is to showcase how we're different, but also how we can work together and how that relationship can benefit our members, such as Dystonia Europe. And what we want to focus on are examples of positive partnership, because that's what it's about. And I think one of our key messages today is to look at how, whether it's EFNA, whether it's Dystonia Europe, or whether it's the European Brain Council, how we add value to one another. Because we've got to be careful that as umbrella organisations, we're not encroaching on the territory of our members. We've got to ensure that we empower, that we add value, and that we build capacity within our member organisations. And hopefully, as we run through this presentation, you as the Dystonia community will see ways in which you can leverage what we're doing at a pan-European level to add capacity to your work at the European level also, but also in your national organisations across Europe.
one very concrete example of that complementarity in our work at the level of EBC is the production of a report which is really a landmark for the organization. It's now the third version of a consensus statement for the priorities in brain research at European level. So that document was really meant to represent all the views from the scientific partners and members of EBC, the patient groups very importantly, and all the associated organizations that we work with. The idea was really to try and influence the framework programs of the Commission. The next one is looming up, FP9, and very importantly, the new vision of that framework program is to incorporate missions. So you may have heard that now the Commission dreams of a man on the moon as being like a new landmark in order to make the citizen on the streets dream about something that is highly scientific, highly, I would say, incorporating in terms of a challenge to be achieved and to try and promote and give visibility to it. Our ambition as EBC, as EFNA, and as a broader community, we would like the brain to be recognized as a mission as part of the next framework program. We have already made the case to the Commission, to the Council and Parliament, and we will be presenting this mission in 2 weeks at a workshop we organize in Brussels. But in order to do that, and in order to make the most noise about our ambitions, was to try and create visible vehicles in our communication and advocacy. So one of them was the creation of I Love My Brain as a logo and as a kind of trademark that can be used by the community. So there is no intellectual property right attached to that. We invite all our members, and including Dystonia Europe, to use it as widely as you feel appropriate, in order really to promote the message around the raising awareness on brain disorders, research and care. And I just wanted to mention that for that reason, but also by the fact that at one of the latest events we organized in November, we had the pleasure of having Monica presenting the My Dystonia app in the framework of our event on the digital future of brain health.
And I think, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation, obviously advocacy is something that we are very strongly focused upon within EFNA. And I think our advocacy activities within the European Parliament complements to a large extent the work that the European Brain Council are doing with the European Commission. And back in 2015, we launched our MEP, so Member of the European Parliament Interest Group, on brain, mind and pain. And the idea behind this was to try to structure our advocacy work and to streamline the political or policy areas that we wanted to focus upon. And we brought together 50 patient advocates, including some dystonia patient advocates, to Brussels to talk about what were the priorities that we wanted to see addressed at the European level. And initially I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare. We're going to have 50 people in the room. They're all going to have a different idea of what we need to cover as part of this interest group. We are never going to reach a consensus on this. But actually, very quickly, we came about our 4 main focus areas. And they, I think, apply across the board within our membership. And we have to be mindful as an umbrella that the areas which we are covering are areas that all of our member organizations have an interest in, areas of mutual interest. So we came up with stigma, quality of life, patient involvement, and research. And dystonia, I think, has fit in quite well with a lot of the advocacy work that we have done at the European Parliament over the last number of years. So we've had about 10 meetings of that MEP interest group in the Parliament. We've had a speaker from the dystonia community attend 2 of those meetings. So we had a presentation actually from Monica's daughter at one of our earliest meetings on the topic of stigma and speaking about what it is to live as the daughter of somebody affected by a neurological disorder. We had a presentation from Monica herself at a very recent meeting on ensuring equitable access to treatment. And of course, we've had other representatives from the dystonia community in the audience participating and contributing at some of the other events. We have quotes from dystonia patients in our book of evidence, which sounds very grand, but basically what it is taking those 4 focus areas I just mentioned and devoting a chapter each in a document to them, setting out the challenges, proposing some solutions to those challenges, including patient testimony, some best practice case studies. And really what that has done is it's provided us with a framework document that we can leverage and we can use to, I suppose, advise us on the direction we need to go in terms of our advocacy work. And they're sort of very tangible things, but I think there's a lot of intangible, indirect benefits to the dystonia patient community as well that comes about from us all working together in the field of neurology. I could give you lots of examples, but I have a couple I'd like to mention from our work on access to employment. And I think that came out very strongly at your event yesterday, particularly from Adam's testimony about how people living with dystonia want to be able to continue to work, especially younger people, and the impact that that has, if they can't, on their overall quality of life. And that's something that doesn't just come up in dystonia, that's something that everybody living with a neurological disorder is concerned about. So we made access to employment one of the key focus areas of our work under that pillar of quality of life. And of course, that went down well at the European institutions because policymakers are always concerned with economic growth and social progress. So we initially had an amendment to the EU Framework on Health and Safety at Work, which is, I suppose, a document which called for reasonable accommodations, amongst other things, for people living with chronic conditions. So we thought, okay, we've had our first success, let's build on that. So we went ahead and in 2016 we launched a written declaration on access to employment for people affected by neurological disorders and chronic pain conditions. Now, if you're not familiar with a written declaration, it was a mechanism that the European Parliament used, I suppose, to draw attention to topics that policymakers should be addressing. For a written declaration to actually be successful, you need 50% of all MEPs in the Parliament, so that's 300 and something MEPs, to actually sign the document within a 3-month period. If they don't sign, the document lapses and it's not successful. Now, we launched ours about a month before we heard that written declarations as an instrument of the Parliament were actually going to be disbanded altogether, so the timing was bad. It also coincided with the Christmas break, and we thought, are we wasting our time here? In some ways, we expected that it wasn't going to be successful, but what we wanted this to be was a hook for us to be able to talk to policymakers about these topics. And in fact, we didn't have the 300 plus MEPs, but we had close to 200. So we have a huge support base of MEPs within the Parliament now who are prepared to work with us on this topic. And we have renamed that written declaration as our call to action to make work work for people living with neurological disorders. And that's opened a lot of doors for us because people started to hear EFNA are working on this topic. So very recently we were invited to become part of Work Package 8 in CRODIS Plus. CRODIS Plus is a joint action on chronic diseases that is supported by the European Commission. And during the first joint action, neurology pretty much was locked out. I mean, we weren't really represented there. And this time round, the EBC and ourselves have now been invited to become part of this work package. So we're moving forward and we're moving in the right direction. And I think thanks to sort of our visibility within the European institutions, that's starting to happen.
Well, besides these very particular activities and focused, we wanted to list a few other examples of how the partnership was really fostered. One example is the fact that we try and support each other's events. We submit jointly to consultations such as the one on health technology assessment or supplementary protection certificates that were run by the Commission very recently. Donna mentioned the organization of interest group meetings to which we contributed in July by presenting the results of a project which I will present in greater detail in just a moment. The latest, which is probably the most focal in the result of all of that, is the alignment of our agenda on a new trend of activity which we have named the value of innovation. So it's how basically we can translate better research outcomes into very concrete therapeutic innovations to the benefit of patients. And simply to make sure, and that's very much to the credit of EFNA, we can make sure that we take the patient perspective as central in focusing this advocacy. So the project I wanted to mention on the value of early intervention is the one we run on the value of treatment. So you can see that that concept of value is now being declined in various ways. originates on the cost study that EBC released in 2010, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, where we estimated the cost and burden of brain disorders to approach the number of 800 billion euros a year. And actually, sorry for the typo here. And we wanted to build on the study to try and capture the impact of non-treatment. That was one of the main conclusions in 2010, was to say, okay, it's all very fine to estimate an economic figure, but what does it mean? Or is it really the right message to send to patients to say, look, what you cost to society, which was exactly not what we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to take the other angle and say, okay, but what if we, as decision makers, were not investing in this treatment? Whoa, are you okay?
I'm sorry, go ahead. My parents and my sister are watching at home and they probably
she's
think
okay,
that's
she's
hilarious.
okay. She's okay.
Hi. And actually, it was just to draw attention to my shoes because as you can see, Fred and I are both wearing turquoise to actually illustrate the positive partnership. So I didn't know how I was going to get it in, so I decided to fall off the stage. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What would we do in order to demonstrate partnership? Yeah, indeed. So basically, that So coming back on that notion of non-treatment, we wanted to emphasize the fact that still investing in the treatment of brain disorders made sense and was important because the impact of non-treating and non-investing would be even worse. So we started from the concept that out of 10 people living with a brain condition, we estimated that between 3 and 8 didn't have access to the right treatment, whilst very often that treatment existed. And we basically conducted an analysis based on what we call the patient journey to evaluate the extent of the treatment gap, which was really the basics of the study. This analysis was conducted on the basis of the expertise gathered from patient advocates, clinicians, health economists, and we really released the report with the focus on the importance of early intervention. So the project is being now continued with other teams being developed, like transition of care and potentially others. And we are now in discussion also in order to look into the potential for dystonia to become a new case study within the aegis of under the aegis of that project.
Thanks, Fred. I'll try to recompose myself after that.
And I'll stay quiet.
So I think EBC obviously have been a leader in terms of generating evidence for advocacy in the field of neurology. You know, as Fred has said, not just the value of treatment, but the cost of brain disorders, the consensus document, and so on. But we've tried to add to that pool of evidence by creating, I suppose, our own evidence from a patient-relevant perspective. And back in 2014, we launched a patient experience survey to which we had about 4,000 responses from patients living with neurological disorders across Europe, and which really gave us an insight into the impact that these disorders have on the daily life of people affected. And we have used that, I suppose, to add some life to the advocacy work that we've been doing at the European institutions. Now, this year we've moved on to focus specifically on younger people because I think we've realised within the patient advocacy community, often it's an older demographic that tend to get actively involved. And very often, although we're putting forward quite a broad patient perspective, there are some groups that are excluded from that. And what we want to ascertain really via the survey that we launched back in Brain Awareness Week are, number one, what are the issues that most affect young people affected by a neurological disorder? What do they want us to tackle? Are we doing the right things? And also to try to get some insight onto why are younger people perhaps not engaging with patient organisations? And if in some disease areas they are very actively involved, what can our other members learn from that? And I would encourage you all, if you're between the ages of 18 to 35, to do go ahead and to actually complete that survey. It's running until the 21st of May. If you're not within that age bracket, then please do circulate it to other members of your organisations and ask them to get involved too. Because it's really important for us that we have a wide snapshot of different disease areas and also input from a wide variety of countries across Europe. We'll be publishing the results on World Brain Day, which is July 22nd, via social media. And we'll also be doing a pre-launch of some of the initial results at the Congress of the European Academy of Neurology. And we're going to try and do that within the context of, I suppose, a short awareness campaign, which we are labelling #BrainLifeGoals. And if some of you are familiar with the #LifeGoals that you'll sometimes see on social media with people saying, you know, holiday in the Bahamas, skating in Central Park, you know, climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, and they label these statements as life goals. What we want to do is compare those sort of aspirational, maybe frivolous life goals with the life goals of younger people living with neurological disorders, which may be to keep their job, to continue their education, to get out of bed in the morning, to be able to tie their shoelaces. So I think it's really very important that we showcase to the wider society just what it means to live with a neurological disorder. And obviously we will want the young Dystonia community to get involved with us around that particular campaign. And this will all be followed in November when we have a workshop on health advocacy in the digital world. This will be on the 19th and 20th. It'll be for patients aged 18 to 35, and it will be in Brussels. And again, we would like some members of the Dystonia community to be there over the 2 days in Brussels and getting involved with that agenda. Monica will have all the details, and I'm sure she'll circulate it to anybody who's interested. And I think this particular project, you know, it's not just advocacy, it's also awareness, which is one of our strategic focus areas. It's also engagement, so working with a different audience. And it also comes under the area of empowerment, which is something that we've really focused on as an organisation for a long number of years. I think some of you may have attended the workshops that we used to run in the London School of Economics on health technology assessment, and they morphed into workshops on pricing, access and reimbursement. And they were wonderful workshops. We have 300 people in our alumni network, and we're really successful at that point in time. But I think over the years, more organisations have come to realise the importance of these types of topics. We've seen the launch of UPATI, some of you may be UPATI Fellows, which is the European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation, and they've taken on sort of a training and education role in these topics. We've seen the industry themselves start to run training and capacity building initiatives for patients. And so we felt it was time for us to hone in on the specificities that we see in the area of neurology. And so we launched our own internally coordinated training initiatives for neurology advocates. Our next event is actually next week in Lisbon, and I know Adam is going to be there on behalf of the Dystonia community. And the topic is going to be value, so looking at patient perspectives and preferences on what the value of treatment really means, particularly in the area of health technology assessment, and that's looking at sort of assessing whether new drugs are cost effective or not. It's actually in partnership with these guys at the European Brain Council, so we will have an EFNA specific session on day 1, and then we will have a joint session on day 2, which will bring in the other stakeholders in the field to have a wide-ranging discussion on their value of treatment project and how that can actually be applied and implemented from the patient perspective. The next event, which we haven't actually opened registration for yet, so again, if anyone's interested in being there, we'd be happy to have you. This is going to happen in partnership with another group, actually a European Brain Council member, FENS, which is the Federation of European Neuroscience Societies. They organise an annual forum every year for basic neuroscientists. This year it's taking place in Berlin, and they have offered us a satellite session there where we will explore the topic of science for advocates. And basically what we want to do at that point is to introduce the patient advocacy community to the area of basic neuroscience, because very often we focus on clinical research, being involved in clinical trials, looking at phase 2, phase 3 treatments coming to market. But very often we don't see, I suppose, the role that patients can play within the basic neuroscience community. It's a different role. It may be flagging up unmet needs, for example, but it's something that we want to look at. We also want to look at the emerging trends in the area of neuroscience, the ethical implications of some of those things, and we will spend a second day in a more practical way assessing how do we access science, how do we better understand science, so how do you read a scientific paper, and how do you then take that knowledge within your own disease area and use it to improve your advocacy efforts when you're talking to policymakers and decision makers. So there'll be 2 sides to that workshop, but I think, you know, it will be something of real use to our community. And the final event will happen in Bucharest in October in 2018, because as well as having these large pan-European events, we've also started to host national events in specific countries, in the national language, focusing on the topics and the issues that really affect patient groups in those countries. Because the feedback we got was, yes, it's great to understand what's going on at a European level, it's great to have all this theoretical knowledge, but when I go back to my desk in Poland or Spain or in Romania, which are the countries we had workshops in last year, not very much use to me because I don't really know how to apply it or where to start. So I think that was really something important for us. Now, the Bucharest event is not just for Romanian delegates. It will be for other advocates in the Eastern European area, and also for advocates who have attended some of our other national events previously, because we see this as a step on from that. So you've attended nationally, you understand the topics and issues, but now let's see how we can link that to what's happening at the European level. And I've included our annual General Assembly here under the topic of empowerment, because I think, like a lot of patient organisations, it's not just a business meeting anymore. It's a way for us all to get together. It's a way for us to share our knowledge. It's a way for us to learn from each other. And we tend to have very interactive sessions at the annual General Assembly, which we organise every year to coincide with the annual Congress of the European Academy of Neurology, which Alistair mentioned earlier. And the reason we do that is because the EAN, very kindly, give us a booth in their exhibition centre. They award us a special session on their programme, which this year is going to look at the Value of Treatment project in partnership with the European Brain Council. They allow us to nominate patient advocates to sit on their various subspecialty scientific panels. So Monica sits on the panel for movement disorders, for example. They also have a recently launched rare disease task force. So really it allows us to get in the mix with the neurologists there and to put forward the patient perspective. We also nominate a couple of sessions on the programme as patient choice. We tend to organise a public awareness day. We meet with the industry. So it's a real advantage to have our General Assembly set up there. The other logos are also a couple of groups where EFNA is represented, and I suppose where you as the Dystonia Europe community are represented indirectly through us. And I just mentioned in pink at the bottom that we also organise an annual partners meeting, which used to be called our corporate partners meeting. So basically we brought the industry together and we told them about what we were doing last year and what we're doing next year. But we've made that a more interactive event. We've opened it up to some of these other groups, to some of our members to come along. We have breakout sessions around our strategic focus areas, so awareness, advocacy and empowerment. And we get everybody talking to each other about what we could potentially do together next. And I think that's a real opportunity for us to ensure that your issues are on our agenda. And just very briefly, before I hand back to Fred, we do a lot of work in the area of awareness, and actually whilst I'm here I just wanted to thank the Dystonia community for really engaging with our Under the Umbrella campaign last year. Elizabeth, who's our communications coordinator, is pictured in the picture at the top, and Under the Umbrella was really an attempt to get all of the different neurological disorders together, take a snap of themselves under an umbrella, and to showcase to wider society, to policy and decision makers, just how many of these disorders come under the umbrella of neurology. Because, you know, we've said it before that when you think about cancer, people don't say, oh, I'm only interested in breast cancer or prostate cancer, or, you know, there's not that fragmentation that we see in neurology where people are only interested in Alzheimer's or epilepsy or Parkinson's to the detriment of all the other disease areas. So what we wanted to do was say, hey, you know, this is not just Alzheimer's, there's more under this umbrella. And that was a really good campaign last year, and you guys were some of the best to get involved and to link that up with your Jump for Dystonia campaign as well. You know, we had people jumping with umbrellas. We linked it up with the I Love My Brain campaign, which Fred presented earlier. And, you know, I think all of these awareness campaigns, there's real opportunity for us to cross over and align rather than seeing ourselves as competing with one another.
Yeah, and the last one to mention, just to introduce the Rise and Stretch session, is the Move for Your Brain, which was actually the first hashtag that we created in order to have a kind of activation Twitter campaign that our team at EBC wanted really to start by running the 20K of Brussels, which we did very proudly 3 years ago for the first time. And now we have a series of activities that really promote the physical activity for the link to promotion of good brain health. So thank you very much for your attention.
And just before we finish, we want to wish Dystonia Europe a very happy 25th anniversary and many more successful years to come. Thanks for listening to us.